Most mandatory military service countries require 2 or 3 years of service from a young recruit's life. But this small nation along the Korean peninsula takes things to another level. Enforced by law, all North Korean men must serve in the military for an average of 10 years, while the women serve 7 years. Yes, you heard that right. Given the average life expectancy of men in North Korea is about 68 years, the average male citizen can expect to spend about 15% of his life in the military, while for women with a life expectancy of 75 years, they can expect to spend almost 11% of their life in military. Now that is insane. With an active military force of nearly 2 million people and a reserve of 6 million, North Korea cracks the top 10 largest militaries in the world, despite being the 54th most populated country, and with good reason. Neighboring with their closest enemy means ensuring their population can handle any attack that comes their way, or vice versa. The country is known for its isolated status, the shocking stories from defectors, the constant threat of nuclear missile use, and of course leader Kim Jong-un constantly popping up in the headlines, memes, and as the occasional movie villain. But the most ignored aspect that has little to no coverage is the key to understanding the confidence behind the supreme leader and his armed forces. The importance of a strong military presence in North Korea dates back towards the end of the Second World War. After 35 years of brutal Japanese colonization, the Korean peninsula came under the influence of two victors, the Soviet Union and the United States. The region was divided in two, with the US-backed South under the leadership of Sangman Rhee, who openly opposed any communist ideas, while the North was led by the USSR-backed communist leader Kim Il-sung. After World War II, clashes in political ideals as both North and South claimed ownership of the entire peninsula became frequent, and in 1950 things came to a climax. North Korea invaded the South, marking the start of the Korean War. Both the US and the USSR backed their respective allies, leading to a long and bloody 3-year battle. 2.5 million casualties later, both sides signed a truce, though till this day there is no formal treaty. North Korea went on to grow economically and military-wise, with Kim Il-sung tightening his grip on power. He followed the philosophy of self-reliance, which shaped modern-day North Korea. He also implemented Cabinet Decision No. 148, which said that men aged 17 and above were mandated to enlist in the army for 3.5 years and the navy for an additional 4 years. This was further pushed after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where North Korea watched the USSR concede to the US. Kim Il-sung wanted North Korea to be completely self-sufficient and capable of winning a quick, decisive war without any allies. Despite this, the Soviet Union continued to back North Korea, giving them enough to sustain themselves as a powerful military force up until the fall of the USSR. The weakness felt after the fall of the Soviet Union led to an obsessive focus on military might. Kim Jong-il, who took over from his father in 1994, pushed forward the philosophy of jong-un, meaning military first. Being isolated and in a close striking range of US military forces in Seoul, Kim Jong-il dedicated most of North Korea's budget to military growth and the elevation of the Korean People's Army and Party as the center of all North Korean society, economy, and politics. Despite growing poverty in North Korea, Kim Jong-il spent 1/4 of the nation's GDP on military expansion efforts and increased the mandatory conscription time to an insane 13 years. Nationalism became one of the core structures and characteristics of North Korean society, and that point of view grew when 27-year-old Kim Jong-un took over from his father in 2011. The 13-year conscription was reduced to 10 so that the North Korean labor force could grow, but Kim Jong-un compensated for that with the introduction of forced conscription for women in 2015, which did annoy citizens. Women were mandated to serve 7 years, from the time they're 17 to 23, and it caused a ripple in the economy as women made up the majority of the trade and farming sectors. On paper, the numbers seem clear, but the reality is a lot more complex. A soldier's conscription may last 6 years, 10 years, or even 15, depending on the circumstances. With these actions, the entire North Korean population grew into a combat-ready nation. For soldiers today, the incentive to join the army no longer lies in the benefits for their family or status like in the past. For the average North Korean, there is no choice. Avoiding prison time or forced farm labor is the main motivator. Knowledge about the daily conditions of those serving time in conscription is rare, but with every defector that tells their story, we get to see a piece of the puzzle that is the North Korean army. Most male soldiers are pre-recruited, registering with the government at 14 years old. Once they graduate from senior middle school, which is the North Korean equivalent of high school, they're taken through a physical exam. A candidate must be at least 4 feet and 8 inches tall and 95 pounds, though these restrictions are rarely followed as the population decreases. If you are fortunate enough to fail your physical exam or born with a disability that bars you from military service, then a worse fate awaits you. Citizens like this are sent to rural areas where they work as farmers, miners, and railway constructors. The conditions in these rural areas can be brutal, and though the army is tough, there is a sense of pride and fulfillment that comes with having completed your conscription. Most who are shipped off to the rural areas as extra labor don't gain much and are often labeled as criminals or failures. While this sounds like something out of a movie, it's the way of living for most North Koreans. One defector who had served the army for decades described the situation for soldiers as not much better than those in mines and railways. Food conditions are lacking and desperate. Because of the scarcity of food, soldiers often suffer from malnutrition, so much so that they have a name for it: supplement squads. The defector noted that if you are starved enough to get entered into a supplement squad, then death is inevitable. Soldiers would give the little rations they had to these squads, but more often than not, it wouldn't be enough. When the army officials see that you're nearing death, they discharge you and thank you for your service. These soldiers often return to the outside and wait for the end. While everyone assumes that the nation of North Korea is ruled with an iron fist, you'd be forgiven for thinking that all North Koreans accept their fate and carry out their conscription. But that's never the case when power, money, and influence are involved. Like any other country, North Korea has its elite. The members of the government that run the Korean Workers' Party and army alongside the president live a very different lifestyle than the average citizen farming melons in the rural regions. For example, spies who report directly to the leader are the more affluent of society. They are gifted with lavish houses, luxury brand clothing, and access to international items that some average citizens didn't even know existed. They also all have top-of-the-line cars which they must return upon dismissal. Most of all, they and their children have the privilege of seeing little to no military activity. A farmer's son who barely passed high school is guaranteed a 10-year sentence in the military, but the same failing kid from a higher-up may only serve 3 years or maybe even none. Conscription can be dodged by some and altogether waived for others, based on being declared medically exempt or not. In fact, it's a growing trend now of North Korean youths to try dodge service. Those with hepatitis or tuberculosis are excluded from the initial recruitment, so some people were found trying to get rejected at the physical examination by drinking a whole bottle of soy sauce to abnormally increase liver functions. This is just one of the many tricks young people are secretly sharing with each other to avoid the military and learn a trade skill instead. There is also another way to avoid conscription altogether: be extraordinarily gifted. Those gifted in science, technology, social studies, and literature are given a pass as they are seen as the best and brightest of North Korea. They are almost always immediately employed after their college years and get to work serving the state in a less exhausting way. But the reality is, the answers to who does the military service and who doesn't lie in the person's closeness to top military and political officials. So, while it's urged as a necessity for national security, the rules are constantly bending to the will of those who make them. Despite all of this though, one defector revealed that Kim Jong-un's approval rating amongst average North Koreans is pretty high. He's seen as someone who took on a massive responsibility at such a young age. He also has the reputation of being one of the more liberal leaders, associating with common people, pausing to speak to them, hugging them and shaking their hands. In response to their neighbor's growing army, South Korea introduced its mandatory conscription, but the 2-year service pales in comparison to their neighbors. North Korean invasion has always been a threat to the South, but unlike the North, South Korea has the massive backing of the US military. With Camp Humphreys being the largest US military base in the Asian Pacific, the population is free to pursue alternative careers. North Korea switches back and forth between diplomacy and hostility, but no matter the position they hold in this globalized world, much like other nations, their commitment to military expansion is likely here to stay.